I looked the restaurant manager in the eye and said, "I do not know these people." I told my father he could not have a seat at my graduation dinner. I spent most of my childhood in the backseat of a sedan. My younger sister was a prodigy on the violin. By the time she was 10, my parents had mapped out her entire life. Every vacation was a trip to a conservatory. Every weekend was a rehearsal or a recital. I was the one who sat in the hallway doing homework on my lap while the music played behind closed doors. My parents did not hate me. They just forgot I was there. I was the reliable one. I got good grades without being asked. I made my own sandwiches. I learned early on that if I did not cause a problem, I did not exist. My high school track meets were always on the same days as her performances. I would come home with a medal, and my mom would tell me to keep it down because my sister was napping for the evening show. When it came time for my college graduation, I did not even tell them the date. I worked 3 jobs to pay for my degree, so I would never have to ask them for a dime. I wanted to see if they would notice the milestone was coming. They didn't. In April, my father called to ask if I could house sit for a week in May because they were taking my sister to an international competition in Prague. I told him I was busy that week. He sounded annoyed. He asked what could possibly be more important than supporting my sister's career. I told him I was graduating with honors and had been invited to speak at the ceremony. There was a long pause. He did not say he was proud. He just asked why I had not mentioned it sooner so they could try to work around it. I told him I had mentioned it 3 times over the last year, but he had been too busy looking at flight prices for Europe to hear me. I decided to have a small dinner at a nice steakhouse after the ceremony. I invited my 2 best friends and the professor who had mentored me. It was only 6 people. I paid for the reservation in advance. The week before graduation, the Prague trip fell through. My sister got a minor wrist injury, and the doctors told her to rest. Suddenly, my parents were available. My mother called me in tears, saying it was a sign from God so they could be there for my big day. She started talking about where we should eat and which relatives she was going to invite. I told her she was welcome to sit in the back of the auditorium for the ceremony, but the dinner was full. She laughed like I was joking. She said a daughter cannot exclude her own parents from a graduation dinner. I told her it was not a family dinner. It was a dinner for the people who had actually been present for the last 4 years. I told her that since they had planned to be in another country anyway, they should enjoy the quiet night at home. My father took the phone. He told me I was being vindictive and petty. He said they had provided for me for 18 years, and he deserved to celebrate my success. I reminded him that providing for someone is the bare minimum of parenting, not a ticket to a front row seat at a life he took no interest in. I told him that for the last decade, I had been an extra in the movie of their lives. I was done being a supporting character. They showed up at the restaurant anyway. I was sitting at a round table with my friends, laughing and feeling like a real person, when I saw them standing at the host stand. My father was wearing his good suit. My mother was holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers. The manager came over to our table and whispered that a couple was claiming to be part of my party. I looked my father in the eye from across the room. I did not wave. I did not stand up. I told the manager that I did not know them and that my party was already complete. The scene they made was brief but loud. My father shouted that I was an ungrateful child. My mother cried into her napkins. The security guard escorted them out. My friend stayed silent for a moment. Then my professor raised his glass and toasted to my future. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For years, I had been waiting for them to choose me. That night, I realized I could just choose myself. They have sent a dozen emails since then. They talk about how much they miss me and how the family is broken. My sister sent a message saying I was being cruel to people who were just doing their best. I did not reply. The silence that followed their eviction from the steakhouse was the most honest moment I'd ever had with my friends. Usually, you try to hide the cracks in your family. You make excuses. You say your parents are just eccentric or busy, but there was no hiding that. The manager came back a few minutes later with a fresh round of drinks on the house. He didn't say anything, just gave a small, understanding nod. He'd seen plenty of family drama in his 20 years of table service, but I think the coldness in my voice when I disowned them in front of a room full of diners was a first for him. We finished the meal. The steak was perfect, medium rare, charred just right. I ate every bite. I didn't lose my appetite. In fact, I felt ravenous. For the first time in 22 years, I wasn't checking my watch to see if I was inconveniencing anyone. I wasn't keeping my voice down. I wasn't waiting for a violin bow to drop so I could finally breathe. When I got back to my apartment that night, the adrenaline started to wear off. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my cap and gown hanging on the closet door. The black fabric looked heavy. I thought about the graduation ceremony earlier that afternoon. I had stood on that stage, looked out at the sea of several thousand people, and spotted them immediately. They were in the middle section, 3 rows from the back. My father had his arms crossed. My mother was looking at her phone. My sister wasn't there. She was home icing her wrist, probably mourning the loss of her Prague debut. They hadn't cheered when my name was called. They didn't stand up. They just sat there like they were waiting for a bus. Afterward, when the crowd descended into the courtyard, they tried to corner me. My mother reached out to hug me, smelling like the lily-scented perfume she always wore to recitals. "We're going to the car," she'd said, as if it were a foregone conclusion. "We'll follow you to the restaurant." "No," I said. "I told you. The reservation is for 6. There are 6 of us." "Don't be like this, Chloe," my father snapped. "We drove 3 hours. We missed the trip of a lifetime for this." "You didn't miss it for me," I told him. "You missed it for a sprained wrist. Don't lie to me. It's insulting." I walked away from them then, weaving through the other families who were actually hugging, actually crying, actually looking at their children like they were the center of the universe. I didn't look back until I reached my car. The email started at 2 a.m. The first one was from my father. Subject line, disrespect. It was a 3-paragraph rant about the cost of my braces in middle school, the tires he'd bought for my car when I turned 16, and the sacrifices they had made. It's funny how parents who ignore you always have a ledger of every dollar they spent. As if child rearing is a business loan they they expect to be repaid in blind obedience. The second was from my mother at 4:30 a.m. Subject line, I don't recognize you. It was filled with emojis of broken hearts and mentions of her high blood pressure, which she claimed I was making worse. She told me my sister was crying because the family was shattered. I didn't reply to either. I went to sleep. 2 days later, I was packing up my apartment to move to the city where I'd landed my first real job. It was a junior analyst position at a firm that didn't care about my sister's vibrato or my parents' expectations. They just cared that I was fast with numbers and didn't crack under pressure. There was a knock on the door. I knew the rhythm. 3 sharp, impatient raps. My father. I opened the door, but I didn't pull it wide. I stood in the frame. He was holding a box of my old things from their attic. You left this, he said. No hello. No congratulations on the move. I didn't leave it. I threw it out, I said. I looked into the box. It was my old track trophies and a few yearbooks. You were supposed to put that in the trash 2 years ago. I thought you'd want them. Memories, he said. He tried to peer past me into the apartment. Your mother is in the car. She's too upset to come up. She says you're acting like a stranger. I am a stranger? I said. That's the point. You spent 15 years treating me like a ghost. Now that the ghost is leaving the house, you're upset you can't haunt me anymore. We did our best, Chloe. Do you have any idea how hard it was? Balancing your sister's talent with a normal life? You didn't balance anything, I said, my voice steady. You chose her every single day. You chose the violin. You chose the travel. You chose to sit in the front row for her and the back row for me. And that's fine. That was your choice. But now, I'm making mine. I'm choosing the people who see me. He looked at the box, then back at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not regret, exactly. More like confusion. He genuinely couldn't understand why a roof over my head and food on the table weren't enough to buy my soul. He thought he'd been a good father because he hadn't hit me or left us. He didn't realize that you can abandon a child while standing right next to them. Keep the box, he said, setting it down in the hallway. We're going to dinner. Your sister is playing a small benefit tonight. You should come. It would mean a lot to her. I almost laughed. I really did. Even now, standing in the wreckage of our relationship, he was trying to recruit me back into the audience. I'm busy, I said. Doing what? Living my life without a soundtrack. I shut the door. I didn't wait for him to walk away. I went back to my packing tape and my cardboard boxes. Moving to a new city was like taking a deep breath after being underwater for a decade. Nobody knew I was the other daughter. Nobody asked how the violin was going. I made friends at the office. I went to happy hours. I met a guy named Mark who worked in IT and didn't know a cello from a bassoon. 6 months went by. I changed my phone number. I filtered their emails into a folder I never opened. It was peaceful. Then came the invitation. It wasn't an email. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope delivered to my office. My sister was having her debut at Carnegie Hall. It was the culmination of years of hard work, the card said. There was a handwritten note from my mother on the back. Please, Chloe, this is her biggest night. The family needs to be whole. We bought you a ticket. Row B, right in front. I stared at that ticket for a long time. Row B. I remembered being 12. I had a track final. It was the 400-meter dash. I'd worked all season for it. I begged them to come. They said they'd try. I spent the whole warm-up looking at the bleachers. I saw every other parent there. I saw the orange slices and the cheering sections. My lane was empty. I won the race. I stood on the podium, and when I looked out, I saw my father pulling into the parking lot just as the awards were finishing. He didn't even get out of the car. He just honked to let me know it was time to go because we had to get my sister to her lesson. I didn't go to Carnegie Hall. Instead, I took Mark to a dive bar around the corner from my apartment. We ate greasy burgers and played pool. I told him a little bit about it, not the whole thing, just that my family was complicated. Do you feel bad? He asked, leaning over the table to take a shot. No, I said. I feel light. That night, my phone, my new number, which my sister had somehow managed to get from a cousin, blew up. Where are you? The seat is empty. Mom is crying in the lobby. You are so selfish. I blocked the number. An hour later, a video was sent to my work email. It was my sister's solo. She was brilliant, of course. She was a master of the instrument. The music was beautiful, sweeping, and tragic. But as the camera panned to the audience, I saw my parents. They were in the front row, glowing. They looked like they were being baptized in the sound. I realized then that they didn't actually want times me, times there. They wanted the times idea, times of me. They wanted to look to their left and see a complete family unit so they could feel like they'd succeeded. I was just a prop they needed to finish the set design. If I wasn't there was a hole in their narrative of the perfect musical family. I deleted the video. The final straw came a year later. My father had a heart scare. Nothing major. A bit of localized chest pain that turned out to be stress and poor diet, but it was enough to get them back on the warpath. My mother called my office line. I made the mistake of picking up. He could have died, Chloe, she sobbed, and your name was the last thing on his lips. He kept asking why his daughter hates him. I don't hate him, Mom, I said, staring at a spreadsheet. Hate takes energy. I just don't have anything left for you guys. I gave it all away, sitting in those hallways while you were inside with her. You're being so dramatic. We gave you everything. You gave me a room, I said. You forgot to give me a place. There's a difference. We're coming to see you, she said, her voice turning hard. We're driving up this weekend. We need to settle this. Your father needs peace. Don't, I said. I won't be here. We have your address, Chloe. We'll wait on the doorstep if we have to. I hung up. I didn't doubt her. My mother was a woman who could coordinate a 3-city concert tour. She could certainly coordinate an ambush at a suburban apartment complex. Saturday morning, I saw their sedan pull into the visitor parking lot. I watched from behind my blinds. My father got out slowly, leaning on a cane he probably didn't need, but used for the theatricality of it. My mother was right behind him, looking like she was on a mission from God. They walked up to my door and knocked. I didn't answer. They knocked for 10 minutes. Then they started calling through the wood. Chloe, we know you're in there. Open this door. My neighbors started peeking out. I felt a flash flash of that old shame, the don't cause a problem instinct. But then I realized I didn't cause this. They did. They drove 3 hours to harass a woman who had asked for nothing but silence. I picked up my phone and called the local police non-emergency line. "Hi," I said, my voice remarkably calm. "There are 2 people at my door who won't leave. They're shouting and disturbing the building. I've asked them to stay away, but they're trespassing. Are you in danger, ma'am?" "No," I said. "I just want them gone." 10 minutes later, a cruiser pulled into the lot. I watched through the window as the officer approached them. My father started gesturing wildly, pointing at the door, probably telling the officer that he was my father, that he had rights, that he had paid for my braces. The officer didn't care. He spoke to them for a long time. Eventually, I saw my mother break down. She wasn't crying because she missed me. She was crying because she was losing control. The reliable daughter had finally broken the script, and she didn't know how to direct the scene anymore. They were escorted back to their car. Before he got in, my father looked up at my window. He couldn't see me through the blinds, but he knew I was there. He shook his head, that same look of disappointment he'd given me when I came in second in a race or got a B+ in chemistry. I watched the sedan pull out of the lot. I watched the taillights disappear around the corner. I went to my kitchen and made a sandwich. I sat at my small table in my small apartment in a city where no one knew the sound of a violin. It was quiet. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. They still try sometimes. A birthday card with no return address. A message on LinkedIn from a fake profile, but the wait is gone. I used to think that being a good daughter meant being a spectator. I used to think that if I waited long enough, the music would stop and they would finally turn around and see me standing there. It took 3 years for the next crack to appear. And when it did, it wasn't my parents who broke the silence. It was a Tuesday in November. I was sitting at my desk. I had been promoted to senior analyst. I owned a couch I bought new, not off Craigslist. I had a life that felt like solid ground. My office phone rang, and the receptionist said someone named Elise was on the line, claiming it was a family emergency. I almost hung up, but a small, morbid curiosity kept the phone to my ear. "I'm in your city," my sister's voice came through the receiver. It didn't sound like the voice of a prodigy. It sounded thin, like a wire stretched to its absolute limit. "The Symphony has a 2-night residency at the theater downtown. Please, just 20 minutes. I didn't invite her to my condo. I told her to meet me at a coffee shop 2 blocks from my building. Public, timed, controlled. It was sleeting when I walked in. The place smelled of roasted beans and wet wool. I found a table by the window and waited. Elise walked in 10 minutes late. I barely recognized her. She was 24, but she looked exhausted in a way that aged her a decade. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, severe bun. She wasn't wearing makeup. The joints of her fingers looked swollen. She sat down across from me without taking off her damp coat. She didn't ask how I was. She just stared at my hands resting on the table. "Mom and Dad are driving me insane," she said. "No hello, just straight into the deep end," assuming I was still swimming in the same pool. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "Dad controls my bank accounts," she went on, her voice trembling. "He negotiates my contracts. Mom travels with me. She packs my suitcases. She tells me what to eat so I don't get bloated before a performance. I have a stomach ulcer, Chloe. I throw up every morning before rehearsal." She looked up at me, expecting something. Sympathy, maybe. Or the old dynamic, the reliable older sister, stepping in to fix the mess. "That sounds awful," I said. It was a flat statement of fact. "I need a break. Just a month. I told the conductor I need medical leave. I want to stay with you. They don't know where you live. If I go to a hotel, Dad will track the credit card. If I stay with you, I can just sleep. Please, just let me sleep." I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the golden child, tarnished and suffocating under the weight of the crown they had bolted to her head. For a brief second, I felt a familiar tug in my chest. The instinct to accommodate. The urge to slide over and make room on the bench. But then I remembered the empty lane at the track meet. I remembered the graduation dinner. I remembered the box of my discarded trophies sitting in my hallway. "No," I said. Elise blinked. The coffee grinder behind the counter shrieked, drowning out the ambient noise for a few seconds. "What do you mean, no? I'm your sister. I'm drowning." "I know you are," I said, "and I'm sorry they did this to you. But you're 24 years old. You make your own money. You can open a new bank account they don't have access to. You can fire Dad as your manager. You can tell Mom to go home. You don't understand how they are." Her voice rose, catching the attention of a man reading a newspaper at the next table. "They don't listen. I know exactly how they are. That's why I left." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "I didn't escape so I could build a safe house for you. You were perfectly happy taking all the oxygen in the room when we were kids. Now that you're choking on it, you want me to share my air. I won't do it." A tear spilled over her lower lid and tracked through the dusting of rain on her cheek. "That's so cruel." "It's not cruel. It's a boundary." I reached into my purse and pulled out a $20 bill. I slid it across the table under her untouched cup of tea. "Buy a burner phone. Call a lawyer to untangle your contracts. Book an Airbnb under a friend's name. You have options, Elise, but I am not one of them." And I stood up. I didn't hug her. I didn't tell her to keep in touch. I buttoned my coat and walked out into the sleet. I didn't look back through the window to see if she was still crying. When I got back to my office, my desk was exactly as I had left it. My spreadsheets were open. My coffee mug was still warm. The city outside my window was gray and loud, a grid of millions of people living their own messy, complicated lives. I sat down in my chair. My heart wasn't racing. My hands weren't shaking. I felt a profound, absolute stillness. The guilt they had tried to wire into my nervous system for 20 years was completely dead. It wasn't just a dormant wire. It had been severed. My sister's desperation hadn't pulled me back in. It had only confirmed what I already knew. My parents didn't love us. They consumed us. They consumed me until there was nothing left to eat, and then they turned and started consuming her. That evening, I left work right at 5. I didn't take the subway. I walked the 2 miles to my apartment. I wanted to feel the cold air in my lungs. I wanted to feel my my own 2 feet carrying me forward. When I unlocked my door, the apartment was dark and quiet. I turned on the lamp in the living room. I put my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. I thought about Elise playing her violin tonight at the theater downtown. I knew the exact routine, the tuning of the strings, the hush of the crowd. My father in the front row, calculating his percentage. My mother beside him, basking in a spotlight she didn't earn. It took 14 months to find out if Elise had listened to me. I didn't Google her. I didn't set up news alerts. But when you work in downtown finance, people talk about the arts when the arts intersect with money. My boss David sent me a link on a Wednesday afternoon. Isn't this your sister? It was an article from a classical music journal. The headline was dry, but the implications were nuclear. Elise, last name, severs ties with management, halts upcoming European tour amidst legal dispute. I read the first 2 paragraphs. She had filed a lawsuit, emancipation of finances, allegations of gross mismanagement and fiduciary breach. She was suing our parents for millions. The money she had earned since she was 12 years old, which my father had conveniently filtered into family trusts and expense accounts. She had taken the $20 I left on the table. She had bought the burner phone. She had called the lawyer. I closed the tab. I didn't reply to David. I just went back to my pivot tables. The fallout was slow, but it was absolute. 6 months after the article, I received a thick manila envelope at my apartment. It wasn't cream-colored this time. It was cheap, standard-issue legal mail. The return address was a law firm in my home state. It was a subpoena. My parents' defense team wanted to depose me. They needed a character witness. They needed the other daughter to sit in a leather chair in a conference room and swear under oath that our childhood home was a place of love and support, not a child labor camp masquerading as a conservatory. They needed me to say my father was a dedicated manager, not a parasite. There was a handwritten sticky note attached to the formal document. The handwriting was my mother's. It was shaky. Chloe, please. We are losing the house. Your father's heart can't take the stress. Tell them the truth about how much we sacrificed. I stared at the yellow square of paper. The house. The sprawling, 4-bedroom colonial with the custom acoustic paneling in the practice room. The house where I had eaten cold cereal at the kitchen island while they packed garment bags in the hallway. They wanted me to save it for them. I didn't call the lawyer. I didn't call my mother. I drafted a single paragraph email to the law firm listed on the subpoena. I am in receipt of your summons. If forced to testify under penalty of perjury, my statement will be as follows. My parents treated my sister as an income-generating asset and me as a liability. I have no knowledge of their financial practices, as I was entirely neglected from the age of 10. If you believe this testimony will aid your client's defense, let me know the time and date of the deposition. I hit send. I never heard from the law firm again. The subpoena was withdrawn within 48 hours. I checked the county property records online a few months later, out of a dark, lingering curiosity. The house had been sold, not a standard sale, a bank foreclosure. They had lost everything. The golden goose had flown the coop, and the backup plan had refused to open the door. They were left with exactly what they had built. Nothing. Just 2 aging people in a rented apartment, surrounded by old concert programs and dried-out supermarket flowers. The final contact happened last Christmas. It was a voicemail. My phone filters unknown numbers, but they can still leave a message in the blocked folder. I saw the transcription pop up on my screen while I was in the kitchen, chopping onions for a holiday dinner with Mark and a few friends who couldn't fly home for the winter. I hit play on the audio. It was my father. The booming, authoritative voice that used to dictate the schedule of our entire lives was gone. He sounded hollow. He sounded like a frail old man. Chloe, it's Dad. It's Christmas Eve. Your mother is asleep. We don't have a tree this year. It's just us. Elise won't speak to us. The lawyers took the rest of the settlement yesterday. I don't know why I'm calling. I looked at a picture of you today. From when you were little, before the violin. You were smiling. I just wanted to hear your voice. He paused. I could hear him breathing over the line. A ragged, wet sound. We made mistakes, he whispered. We are so alone. The line went dead. I stood at the kitchen counter. The smell of raw onions and rosemary filled the air. Mark walked in from the living room, carrying 2 empty wine glasses. He stopped when he saw me looking at the phone. Everything okay? He asked. I looked at the screen. The voicemail was exactly 42 seconds long. 42 seconds of a man realizing that the bill for his life's work had finally come due, and he didn't have the currency to pay it. I didn't feel a surge of triumph. I didn't feel a rush of petty vindication. I just felt tired, not the bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion of my childhood, just a normal, everyday tiredness. The kind you feel when a long, tedious movie finally ends and the house lights come up. I deleted the voicemail. Yeah, I said, sliding the phone into my pocket. Everything is fine. Can you hand me the garlic? Mark smiled, passed me the bulb, and went back to setting the table. I minced the garlic. I scraped it into the hot oil in the pan. The sizzle was loud and sharp, cutting right through the silence of the apartment. 5 years went by like a slow exhale. Mark and I got married. We didn't have a wedding. We went to City Hall on a Tuesday morning. I wore a white sundress I bought off the rack at a department store. He wore a navy blazer. We signed the papers, paid the $75 fee, and went to a food truck down the street for carnitas tacos. There were no speeches. There was no string quartet playing Pachelbel in the background. It was just us, eating off paper plates on a park bench, watching the city traffic roll by. It was the happiest day of my life. I was 31 when the final tab was settled. I was at work, reviewing a quarterly risk assessment, when my direct line rang. The caller ID showed an out-of-state area code somewhere in Florida, which made sense. A lot of bankrupt retirees end up moving down there to live in cheap, swampy subdivisions. Is this Chloe? A woman asked. She had a thick, tired voice. This is Brenda from the Medical Social Work Department at Memorial County Hospital. I took my hand off my mouse. I leaned back in my chair. Yes, I'm calling about about your father, she said. She didn't pause for me to gasp or ask what happened. She worked in a county hospital. She was used to delivering bad news to estranged relatives. He suffered a massive ischemic stroke this morning. He's on a ventilator. Your mother is here, but frankly, she's entirely unequipped to make medical decisions. She gave us your number. I looked out my office window. The sky was the color of wet cement. What do you need from me? I asked. We need a proxy, Brenda said. Someone to sign off on a care plan. Or, given his scan results, a do not resuscitate order. Your mother keeps saying he needs to wake up because he has a meeting with a booking agent. She's not grounded in reality right now. I pictured my mother in a sterile waiting room, clinging to a delusion from a decade ago because the present was too hollow to survive. I can't be his proxy, I said. I haven't spoken to the man in 7 years. Ma'am, if you don't step in, he becomes a ward of the state for medical decision-making. The state will put him in a long-term care facility until his heart gives out. It won't be comfortable. Brenda, I said, my voice completely level. He made his choices a long time ago. I am not his next of kin in any way that matters. Let the state handle it. There was a pause on the line. I heard the faint sound of a hospital PA system in the background of her end. Are you sure? She asked. People regret these things. When it's over, it's over. I grieved my father when I was 12 years old, I told her. I don't have any tears left for a stranger. Good luck. I hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't leave work early. I finished my risk assessment, packed my laptop into my bag at 5 o'clock, and took the train home. When Mark asked how my day was, I told him the truth. I told him the hospital called, and I told him what I said. He stopped chopping vegetables, wiped his hands on a dish towel, and pulled me into a hug. He didn't tell me I should go. He didn't tell me I was being harsh. He just held me. My father died 3 days later. The state had taken over, they pulled the ventilator, and his heart stopped. My mother didn't call me. I found out through an automated email from a cheap cremation service down in Florida, asking if I wanted to purchase an urn. I dragged the email to the trash folder. There was no funeral. There was no obituary in the major papers. No tributes from the classical music community he had tried so desperately to leech onto. He just vanished. A month after that, I checked my mail on a Saturday morning. Mixed in with the grocery circulars and the electric bill was a small square envelope. The handwriting on the front was tight, precise, and completely unfamiliar. There was no return address, just a postmark from Chicago. I opened it in the kitchen. Inside was a piece of heavy cardstock, folded once, and tucked inside the fold was a crisp, new $20 bill. There was no letter, there was no apology, no explanation of where she had been or what she was doing, just 2 lines written in black ink. I bought the burner phone. Thank you. I stared at the $20 bill. I ran my thumb over the textured edge of the paper. Elise was out there, somewhere in Chicago, walking around without a violin case strapped to her back, breathing her own air. She wasn't asking to be in my life. She wasn't trying to rebuild a bridge that our parents had burned to the ground before we even learned how to walk on it. She was just closing the ledger. She had survived too. I smiled. It was a small, quiet smile. I took the $20 bill and put it in the ceramic jar on the counter where Mark and I kept spare cash for pizza delivery. I threw the envelope and the card in the recycling bin. I walked over to the sliding glass door and looked out at our backyard. It was a modest yard. The grass needed mowing. There was a rusted fire pit in the corner that we used on autumn nights and a couple of lawn chairs that had seen better days. It wasn't a sprawling estate. It wasn't a Carnegie Hall stage. It was just mine. 2 years later, I found out I was pregnant. I spent my entire first trimester in a quiet, simmering panic. Mark was ecstatic. He painted the spare bedroom a soft yellow and spent his weekends researching crib safety ratings. I smiled. I helped him pick out blackout curtains, but at night, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, feeling the phantom weight of a generational curse settling on my chest. I was terrified I carried my parents' sickness in my blood. I was afraid that the moment they handed me a child, I would start calculating her worth. I was afraid I would look at a baby and see a project, an extension of my own ego, or worse, an inconvenience. My therapist, a blunt woman named Sarah who I'd started seeing after my father died, told me that the fear itself was the proof I was different. Narcissists don't worry about ruining their kids, she said, sipping her tea. They assume their kids are lucky to have them. Maya was born in late October, during a torrential downpour. She came into the world screaming, red-faced, and furious. When the nurse laid her on my chest, the panic I had been harboring for 9 months evaporated. It didn't fade, it just vanished. I looked at her scrunched up, angry little face, and I didn't see a prodigy. I didn't see a second chance. I just saw a person who needed me. We didn't force her into anything. As she grew, we let her drift toward whatever caught her eye. She tried ballet for 3 weeks and hated the tights. She took swimming lessons and refused to put her face in the water. At age 7, she decided she wanted to play soccer. She was, objectively speaking, terrible at it. She was slow. She got distracted by bugs in the grass. She would run in the wrong direction and apologize to the opposing team when she accidentally bumped into them. I loved every single second of it. Every Saturday morning, Mark and I loaded up the car with folding chairs, sliced oranges, and a thermos of coffee. We sat on the sidelines in the freezing rain, the sweltering heat, the biting wind. We cheered when she managed to kick the ball out of bounds. We cheered when she just stood there looking at the sky. One Saturday in mid-November, during the final game of the season, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. It was a cold, muddy morning. The field was torn up, and Maya's uniform was plastered to her legs. I took my phone out with a gloved hand. It was an email from a social worker in Florida. I recognized the domain from when my father died. The email was brief. My mother had passed away the night before in a state-run nursing facility. She had been declining for years, the social worker wrote, largely nonverbal at the end. They had found my contact information in a dusty file from my father's intake. They were asking if I wanted to claim the personal effects, a single cardboard box of items she had kept in her room. I stood there on the edge of the soccer field. The wind whipped across the flat grass, biting at my cheeks. I watched my breath pluming in the cold air. A single cardboard box. I thought about what might be inside. Programs from Carnegie Hall, newspaper clippings, necklace. Maybe the pearl earrings she used to wear to opening nights. The artifacts of a life built entirely on someone else's talent, stripped down to whatever could fit on a nightstand in a Medicaid-funded room. I looked up from the screen. Out on the field, Maya was running. She wasn't near the ball. She was just running down the sideline, her arms pumping, a massive, goofy grin on her face. Her cleats were caked in thick, heavy mud. Suddenly, she tripped over her own feet and went down hard in a puddle. The whistle didn't blow. The play moved on without her. For a split second, my heart dropped, but Maya didn't cry. She pushed herself up onto her knees, wiping mud off her face with the back of a filthy sleeve. And then, before she even stood all the way up, she turned her head. She looked straight toward the sidelines. She searched the crowd of parents in heavy coats and umbrellas. She was looking for me. She didn't have to search long. I was already standing at the edge of the chalk line. Mark was right beside me. We didn't have to say her name. I just raised my hand and gave her a big, exaggerated thumbs up. Maya's shoulders dropped in relief. She flashed a muddy, gap-toothed smile, scrambled to her feet, and ran back into the middle of the chaos. I looked back down at the email on my phone. I didn't owe the dead anything. I didn't need to look at old concert tickets to remember why I left. I didn't need a box of ghosts in my house. I hit reply. I typed 2 sentences. I do not wish to claim these items. Please dispose of them. I hit send. I deleted the email, turned my phone off, and shoved it deep into my pocket. The referee blew the final whistle a few minutes later. Maya's team lost, 4-0. She came running off the field, shivering, covered in dirt, and smelling like wet leaves. Did you see me? She asked, out of breath, looking up at me with wide, expectant eyes. Did you see when I fell? I saw you, I said. I didn't care about the mud. I knelt down and pulled her into a tight hug, feeling her small, solid heartbeat against mine. I saw the whole thing. You were amazing. Mark handed her a juice box. We folded up our chairs. We walked back to the car together, our boots crunching on the gravel parking lot. My parents died with nothing but empty chairs and faded clippings. When Maya turned 10, she brought home a piece of blue paper that almost stopped my heart. It was a sign-up sheet for the middle school music program. She had checked a box halfway down the page with a thick, blunt pencil. Strings, violin. I stood in my kitchen, holding the paper. My vision actually blurred for a second. The smell of pine, rosin, and lemon pledge furniture polish suddenly filled my nose. So strong I almost gagged. I heard the ticking of a metronome. I saw the black, velvet-lined case sitting on the dining room table of my childhood home, a monument nobody was allowed to touch. Mark walked in from the garage, holding a wrench. He saw my face, dropped the tool on the counter, and took the paper from my hands. He read it. He looked up at me. He knew the whole history. He knew about the locked doors, the hushed hallways, the ruined family. I'll tell her it's full, he said softly. I'll tell her she has to play the clarinet, or the drums. Hell, I'll buy her a drum set right now. I looked at the blue paper. I thought about Maya, who had spent the last week talking about how her best friend Lily was going to play the cello and they were going to start a band. Maya didn't know the weight of that word, violin. To her, it wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a tool used to carve a family into pieces. It was just wood and strings. No, I said. My voice shook a little, but I forced my lungs to expand. No, we're not doing that. We're not making her carry my ghosts. That weekend, we drove to a strip mall music shop. It smelled like stale carpet and guitar polish. We didn't go to a luthier. We didn't take out an insurance policy. We rented a scuffed student-grade instrument in a hard plastic case for $25 a month. When we got home, Maya opened the case on the living room rug. She picked up the violin by the neck, holding it like a dead fish. She dragged the bow across the strings. It sounded like a cat getting caught in a fan belt. It was a sharp, screeching, unholy noise. I waited for the flinch. I waited for my body to go into a cold sweat, to tell her to stop, to tell her she was holding it wrong, to demand perfection. Instead, I started laughing. Maya looked at me, her eyes wide, and then she started laughing too. For the next 3 months, my house was filled with the worst music I have ever heard. She practiced in the living room while I cooked dinner. There were no closed doors. She missed notes. She played out of tune. She scraped and screeched and fumbled through Hot Cross Buns and Mary Had a Little Lamb. I didn't correct her. I didn't hire a private tutor. I just chopped vegetables and told her it was sounding better every day, even when it absolutely wasn't. The winter concert was in the second week of December. It wasn't at Carnegie Hall. It wasn't in Prague or Vienna. It was in the middle school gymnasium. The air smelled of floor wax, wet winter boots, and cheap cafeteria pizza. The lighting was fluorescent and harsh. The stage was just the basketball court, lined with rows of cold, metal folding chairs. Mark and I got there 45 minutes early. The gym was mostly empty, but I didn't care. I walked straight down the center aisle. I bypassed the bleachers. I bypassed the middle rows. I sat down in the absolute dead center of the front row. Slowly, the gym filled up with parents holding smartphones and wrangling toddlers. The band teacher, a tired-looking man in a wrinkled suit, tapped a microphone that let out a loud squeal of feedback. Then, the kids walked out. There were about 30 of them. They wore white button-down shirts and black pants. They looked terrified. They bumped into each other's music stands. One kid dropped his bow on the hardwood floor with a loud clatter. I scanned the rows until I found her. Maya was in the second row of the violins. Her posture was terrible. Her instrument was slouched against her shoulder. She was biting her bottom lip, staring at the sheet music like it was written in a foreign language. The teacher raised his baton. The kids raised their instruments. They played a medley of winter folk songs. It was a disaster. The cellos were rushing, the violins were dragging, and half the group was completely out of tune. It was a chaotic, beautiful, messy wall of noise. I leaned forward in my metal folding chair. I didn't look at my phone. I didn't check my watch. I didn't care about the mistakes. I watched my daughter. I watched the way her brow furrowed when she hit a wrong note, and the way she immediately brushed it off and kept going. She wasn't playing for her life. She wasn't playing for her dinner. She was just a kid in a gym, trying her best alongside her friends. When they dragged their bows across the strings for the final, dissonant chord, the gymnasium erupted into polite, obligated applause. But I didn't clap politely. I stood up, right there in the front row. I put my fingers in my mouth and whistled loud enough to make the guy next to me flinch. I clapped until my palms burned. Maya looked up from her music stand. She scanned the audience, blinking against the harsh gym lights. And then, she saw me, standing right in front of her, taking up space, making noise, cheering for a completely mediocre, entirely perfect performance. She beamed. She waved her bow in the air, completely breaking concert etiquette, and I waved back. In that moment, under the hum of the fluorescent lights, the final chain snapped. The curse was broken. The violin was finally just an instrument. I was finally just a mother. And the front row was exactly where I was always meant to be.